Get in on the secret. September is one of the best times to visit the Boardwalk Plaza Hotel in Rehoboth Beach. The weather is grand, and just steps from the sand, you can relax and experience the convenience of their oceanfront location right on the Rehoboth Beach Boardwalk. Enjoy Victoria's Restaurant, the charming Plaza Pub and room service. Visit boardwalkplaza.com and book your perfect getaway today, or call 800-33-BEACH for fast, friendly assistance. Thanks to the Boardwalk Plaza for being the Bridge Podcast Network sponsor.
Hey, welcome to part 3 of our Why Do Christians Believe in Jesus series, where we're asking the question, why do Christians believe in Jesus?
And we're answering it.
Taking 3 episodes to do it. This episode's all about Jesus in history. I'm Mark Dickey.
And I'm Bert Miller.
This is the Why Do Christians podcast. Hey, welcome to the show. My name's Mark Dickey. I am a host of the afternoon show on the Bridge radio station. You can listen over at wearethebridge.org.
And you should listen to it.
If you're not in the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey area. Man, so many states.
Yeah, what are they doing out there if they're not listening? There's no other music out there. This is the site they should go to.
Yeah. Wearethebridge.org.
Do you like your soul being ministered to in song? wearethebridge.org.
Do you like the sound of my voice between songs?
Don't we all? I can't conceive of music without that voice there now.
Well, I'm Mark Dickey. My co-host is Pastor Bert Miller from Solid Ground Church. Bert, how are you today?
Mark, part 3 Dickey. I'm fine.
I was about to call you Bert part 3 Miller.
Oh, man. Do you want to?
No.
Okay.
No, because then
we can both say it.
I know.
All right.
Maybe that's evidence
of
our friendship.
Well done. Well done, sir. Yeah.
Because, anyway, all right. Well, today we're going to be talking about Jesus in history. So, specifically thinking about, like, okay, if Jesus is real, if he exists, and he does, we would see evidence of him outside of the Bible.
Yeah.
Or things that the Bible references are actually going to be part of human history.
They'd show up somewhere besides the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what this episode's all about, which this is kind of my favorite, like, why do Christians believe in Jesus? Favorite place to go. Because I just love hearing about, oh yeah, we discovered whatever at the bottom of a barrel in the ocean, writings
as
of
we
Jesus,
do. We get a claw machine that goes way down into the depths, and they pull up all kinds of barrels of manuscripts. Yeah. All right.
So, Bert, why is Jesus real?
Well, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but let's let's break down some things. Man, no pressure. Miller, do me a favor. Settle the argument. Christianity true? Yes? Go. No, there's a lot there. I want to just also give credit where it's due. I'm getting a lot right now from a guy named J. Warner Wallace, a book he wrote called Cold Case Christianity. Wallace was if you believe this or not, he was a cold case detective. Like, that was his profession. And he decided to, at one point in his life, because he was not a Christian, just look at the claims of the New Testament and see if he could, through his training, assess their accuracy.
I'm just picturing a man in black and white with a cigar in his mouth, staring through Venetian blinds,
like an old detective,
cold case detective.
Yeah. And so one of the things that he did was he talked about the idea of corroboration, like how if you'd be surveying a scene or interviewing witnesses, there are things that you would be able to do to see if something really happened or the way in which it happened. And so he just kind of breaks that down in a bunch of different ways. So let's, if we're talking about this idea of there being corroborating evidence of the New Testament, or if there's accuracy to it, he makes the case, and I think rightfully so, that the New Testament reeks of authenticity. So, for instance, let's just talk about something as simple as the names that are mentioned in the Gospels. So sometimes what people think is they think, okay, the Gospels they were written, hundreds of years after the fact or whatever, even though the gospel authors claim to be within the context of their writing, right? I mean, that's historically how the church has always understood them, is that they're much earlier than hundreds of years after, whether that be 30 to 40 to possibly 50 years after the fact, but certainly very early documents. So one of the things that Wallace did, for instance, he took if the Gospels were written in the first century, he took an evaluation of names, popular names in the first century, and he looked at, like popular names in Egypt, for instance, and he came up with a list of them, which would be like Sabbataius, Joseph, Dositheus, and Pappus, names, except for Joseph, don't really show up in a region outside of Palestine, where the New Testament is written, But then you've got, what were popular names in Palestine, where the story of Jesus takes place in the first century? Well, here are these names: Simon, Joseph, Eleazar, Judah, Yohanan, which I believe would be a translation of John, Joshua, which would also be Jesus. And then you look at the New Testament. Let's take Simon, for instance, Why?
Also, little history. Joshua meaning Jesus. I bet somebody's like, what do you mean?
Yeah. Like Yeses is Greek transliteration of Yeshua, which is Joshua.
Yeah. It means that just blew my mind when I first heard that the name Yeshua is Joshua.
Yeah.
If you use a soft J.
Yeah. And fun fact, the name means the Lord saves, which is what we believe Jesus did. But let's say, for instance, the name Simon. The gospel authors never make it a point to call out how popular the name Simon was in the day. And yet in the stories, we find Simon Peter, Simon the Zealot, Simon the Tanner, Simon the Leper, Simon of Cyrene. You got all these Simons. Why? Because it's a popular name at that point in history.
Yeah.
Right?
That makes me think of in some shows you might see they'll cut to black and white, not like our detective friend. But and they'll make a joke with like a 50s reference. Like, oh, hey, Billy. Hey, Sally. Like, we even have current media. When we're referencing the 50s and 60s, we name people differently because of the names.
Exactly right.
And that's just, that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, but it doesn't go to just names. We also talk about towns and town locations. So, for instance, we have, they're what are called non-canonical forgeries. Basically, as time goes on, like with hundreds of years later, there'd be people who they would write books that they claimed were like, the hidden Gospel of Judas or, the third epistle of Paul to the Corinthians, or like just books they would claim were written by people in the New Testament that we know for a fact that they weren't. And when you find non-canonical forgeries, what you find is that they rarely mention towns in Palestine, in Judea, other than Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was a really well-known town. But the authors of the New Testament, they're way more familiar with the geography of the stories that they're written in. So they're mentioning little towns that people probably wouldn't think about or know that they existed if they didn't live there. So places like Bethpage, Caesarea Philippi, Salem, Sychar, like you have all these towns in the Gospels that the authors will just mention in passing. Oh, Jesus went to here, or he went through here to get to there. And those geographical trips are right. You wouldn't know that if you haven't made the journey. And so, and there are towns that existed in the first century. There are towns that existed inside of the span that the Gospels claim to be. And so, if you want to call the Gospels forgeries, if you want to say, okay, or say that like the authors of them lied, and say, all right, they were written early, but they're not true. You can choose to believe that if you want. Maybe that'll lead into our next section of corroborating evidence. But it would be disingenuous, and I think maybe intellectually dishonest to say, all right, the authors of the Gospels came well after the fact. And the reason you can't make that argument is because they're just too familiar. They seem soaked in the first century from which they claim to have originated. Like little details that only people who lived there would know.
It's like when you live in a beach community like we do, you know all the back roads during the summertime,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I live here. I know these places.
Yes, and that's what they're doing in the Gospels.
And now Jesus had to go through Samaria.
Yeah. I heard one guy say it like this, just because of how much the Gospels are copied and transmitted. Like, it's not a thing where, there could be a hidden version of the Gospel of Matthew that we don't have. Like, they're just so well circulated that, and so, like, the earlier manuscripts that we have are so close to when they would have been written, to the point where we have all kinds of other historical documents that we have copies of from hundreds and hundreds of years after the fact, that nobody questions if what we have is the right, like the genuine article. And so this guy said, he just went, look, if the Gospels didn't contain supernatural stories, we wouldn't for a second question their historical accuracy. The only reason that we don't is because we don't want to believe what's in them.
Thought this was history, Bert, not deep philosophy. So we jumped into real places that the Bible is referencing. But also, at the same time, there are other historical accounts of non-Christian things referencing people, places, and things in the Bible, right?
Yeah, that's important to realize that the New Testament, the people in it, if they existed, you would think that other people would have mentioned them, particularly around, like, not everybody, because not everybody would have been viewed with the same significance, but certainly notable leaders, government officials, things like that, right? So let's take Jesus himself. That'd be probably pretty easy to do, right? If you had somebody show up and he claimed the kinds of things that Jesus claimed, if he had the following that the gospel said that he had, you would think that other people would make mention of that, right? So the neat thing is they did. So for instance, there's a guy named Flavius Josephus. He wrote around 93 AD, and he was a Jewish historian. He did not believe in Jesus. He was not a Christian. And, he mentions things like the death of John the Baptist. He mentions the death of James, Jesus' brother. And there is a passage in Josephus that a lot of historians believe was altered by early Christians, but not everything in Josephus. And so I thought I would just read you what, I don't know anybody that questions if this is accurately Josephus is writing about Jesus. And this is what he says in his Annals of History. He says, "At this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate, we would expect Pilate, who was a governor, to show up. There he is. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. And those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship." So Pilate said this guy should be crucified and died, but after he died, people didn't stop being his followers. They reported, okay, why? Listen, this is 93 AD. It says, they reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. So you got a guy, 93 AD. So we're talking like a much tighter window. If this is an external source, and we've talked earlier, I believe, about how you find in the earliest Christian writings a belief in the resurrection. Like, it's just too short a span to say that there was like an indulged story of like history turning into myth. Like, no, from the jump, Christians believed that Jesus died and rose, and you got an external guy who didn't believe in Jesus saying the same thing. But it goes beyond that. Let's talk about, how about this? Okay. If Jesus did miracles, if there were miraculous stories around Jesus's life, you would think that would show up. So when Jesus died, right? This is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a detail that the entire land, when he's on the cross, is covered in darkness, even though it's the middle of the afternoon, and there's a great earthquake. Okay, you'd think somebody would notice that, right?
Yeah. Sounds like somebody did.
They did. Yeah. So there's a guy named Thallus who was a Samaritan historian, and he wrote like just sort of an expansive, I think it was 3 volumes, a history on the Mediterranean area in the middle of the 1st century. But here's the crazy, and so he writes about 20 years after Jesus' crucifixion. Now the sad part is that his work has been lost as a whole. The only reason we know Thallus exists is because other historians, early historians, reference him. Okay. So this is a guy named Julius Africanus, and he writes about 221 AD, quoting Thallus. And this is what he says. You ready? He said, "On the whole, there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down." Africanus says, "This darkness Thallus in the third book of his history calls, as appears to me without a reason, an eclipse of the sun." In other words,
Whoa.
yeah. So Thallus is going, hey, the day that Jesus died, there's this eclipse and there's this earthquake. And Thallus's thing is like, well, maybe it was just a natural occurrence. Like maybe that's what happened. But it's crazy. People have wondered that. Okay. And so what they've done, because the way that solar eclipses work is they're mathematical. You can trace them. So they've done the math. They've taken it back. There would have been no natural solar eclipse that would have lined up with that time. So something supernaturally does this thing, and Thallus isn't the only one to record it. Africanus, who I mentioned, who was quoting Thallus, he also says this about a guy named Phlegon, who wrote about 140 BC. He says Phlegon records that in the time of Tiberius Caesar, at full moon, there was a full eclipse of the sun from the 6th hour to the 9th. Which is the time period of Jesus on the cross.
Way.
From the 6th hour to the 9th hour, darkness covered the surface of the land. Yeah. Okay. Origen of Antioch, and he wrote a book called Against Celsus, about 248 AD. He also references this writing of Thallus, and he says this. He says, "And with regard to the eclipse in the time of Tiberius Caesar, in whose reign Jesus appeared to have been crucified, the great earthquakes which then took place," I'm sorry, no, he's referencing Phlegon. He says, Phlegon too, I think, has written in the 13th or 14th book of his Chronicles. So Origen's going, hey, here's this other guy, guys, you can go read his thing right now. He was referencing that this happened as well.
My brain is that's crazy.
Right?
And also, I guess I just think that there's a pessimist in me. It's I wonder if the reason Jesus went into town for his triumphal entry was because Jesus was, if
he did the math.
If he was all right, I know when the eclipse is going to be. If I turn myself in, they're going to. But that's crazy talk, especially 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
And then also, how often does a total eclipse happen?
Yeah.
With
an earthquake.
With an earthquake. Yeah, not even
at the moment that a guy dies. Yeah.
You can't plan that.
Still not done, bro. Still not done. Okay, so let's talk about the crucifixion of Jesus for a second. I had a buddy not too long ago send me this podcast where the guys were like, well, we're not even sure the crucifixion was a real thing. Except we kind of are. So many people mention it. So this comes, I'll reference you a writing from a Roman senator named Tacitus. He was a senator under Vespasian. He writes around 116 AD, and he writes about this fire that Emperor Nero did not handle well in I want to say AD 64, but I could be wrong on that. But this is his recounting of that incident. And so he says, consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. They're named Christians after Christus, Christ, who suffered an extremely graphic, terrible fate under Pontius Pilate, who again referenced by a Roman senator. Okay. Thus, check the moment, again, broke out only in Judea, the first source of evil, but in Rome, where all things hideous, shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So in other words, what Tacitus is saying is, hey, these Christians started out here and they spread even into Rome, and people hate them in Rome, where people are good with everything. Okay? But, bro, still not done. How about this? There's a philosopher whose name was Serapion, who writes somewhere after 70 AD, and he writes to console his son about suffering. And in this writing, he lists people who are famous sufferers. Listen to what he says here. What advantage did the Athenians obtain by putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime. What advantage did the people of Samos for burning Pythagoras? In one moment, their country was covered with sand. Now listen to this. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God rightly avenged these men. So, okay. What advantage did the Jews get from killing the king of the Jews? Well, listen, basically his point is when somebody suffers wrongly, in his worldview, I don't believe he was a Christian. He's like, things work themselves out. So here's this group, this bad thing happens because they did that. Here's this group, here's this bad thing that happened. What happened with the Jewish people there? They killed their king. Talking about Jesus, their kingdom was abolished. Yeah, that's what happened when we referenced this. I think it was last episode with the Jewish revolt where the Romans came in and destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. But dude, like even more, we could talk about Jesus' miracles. Because you'd think if somebody is healing a bunch and doing miraculous things, other people would notice that, right? Like if the Gospels are to be believed and Jesus was known for healing the sick, raising the dead, giving sight to the blind, performing miracles, multiplying food, walking on water, that people would see that. And it turns out they did. So there's this thing called the Jewish Talmud, which it's a collection of writings and teachings of ancient rabbis. It was put together in about the 5th century, but it's pretty commonly accepted that it contains teachings that date back as far as the 1st and 2nd century. Okay. So let me read you a couple things from the Talmud. Here's one thing. This is from the Sanhedrin 43a. It says, Jesus practiced magic and led Israel astray.
Whoa.
Okay. Here's another one. It says, it was taught on the day before Pentecost, they hanged Jesus. A herald went before him for 40 days proclaiming, he will be stoned because he practiced magic and enticed Israel to go astray. Let anyone who knows anything in his favor come forward and plead for him. But nothing was found in his favor, and they hanged him on the day before the Passover. Hanged probably would have to do with the cross, like hanging from it. But regardless, here's this person in the Talmud being like, this guy was known to be a sorcerer. And he was known to be practicing magic, and he led all these Israelites astray. Okay, so you got people who don't believe in Jesus, and they're referencing supernatural stuff that the gospel, because none of those are miracles because he's from God.
Wow.
Right? Isn't that cool?
That's wild.
Yeah.
And I guess the sorcery thing would be because they don't believe in the supernatural.
They don't believe in him.
Okay.
They believed in the supernatural, but they viewed him as a false prophet. Right. Okay. So they would see it as like Jesus. Yeah, Jesus did stuff, but he wasn't from God. I mean, and you see that in the Gospels, right? You see like the Pharisees saying like, listen, it's only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that he's able to cast out demons. Right. So they infer the reason Jesus can cast out demons is because he's so full of the devil.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that squares up with the Gospels very, very well.
Okay. If we want to know, if we want to answer the question, why do Christians believe in Jesus? We've found the writings of people, but like, let's dive more into that archeology topic. Like,
there's a lot of it.
What's been found, discovered?
Sure.
Tell me more.
So, again, the Gospels are not written in a vacuum. They reference people sometimes as prominent, sometimes as people who are central in the narrative, sometimes people in passing, right? So Pontius Pilate is a good example. For a long time, people believed that Pilate wasn't a real guy, even though you have these other ancient sources like mentioning him. But then that's kind of, that belief that Pilate wasn't real has been kind of obliterated. And the reason is in 1961, they found a piece of limestone with Pilate's name on it. So, yeah, nobody really questions if Pilate was real. But when I say like not just people who are large in the narrative, I'll give you an example. So there's this verse in Romans 16. It's part of verse 23 where Paul says, Erastus, who is the city's director of public works, and our brother Quartus send you their greetings. Okay, so Paul references this guy where he is named Erastus, who is the city's director of public works. Okay, well, that's an interesting little detail, because that means he's not a random civilian. He's somebody employed with the state. Well, wouldn't you know it? in 1929, they found a piece of pavement in Corinth with Erastus's name inscribed on it.
Wild.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of thing happens. Like you've got Iconium would be another example. Okay, like you've got in Acts 15:31, Luke mentions Iconium as part of Phrygia, and some people they'd be like, oh no, like Iconium was located in Lycaonia, Lycaonia, rather than Phrygia. But then, so they're like, oh, see, like Luke's wrong about this. But then in 1910, you find this monument that showed that Iconium there was a city named Iconium in Phrygia. Like this happens a lot where like, oh well, we don't have this, we don't have that, and then the thing turns up. Like I mean, I can't stress to you how many times this has happened. Like Luke is a great example. If you're ever going to try and doubt biblical, historicity, Luke is one of the worst places you can go, because Luke is just so soaked in history. Like he mentions things like how people become Roman citizens, like paths to Roman citizenship. He mentions like accurate things, like we've found other things that testify to criminal trial processing. The way that Luke describes it, we now know is like in line with how they did criminal trial processing. We could go on. Like we could talk about, all right, in the Gospels, they mentioned things like the pool of Bethesda or the pool of Siloam. We've found both those pools. Like, what we just find is there are so many things that archaeologically testify to the authenticity of the Testament. It's brought me to a place because sometimes in school I went to a Bible college where I had several professors who were immersed in a criticism of the New Testament and would honestly I'll just take shots at the reliability of the Bible, and they viewed it differently, and the reasons that they had I don't agree with. I'm not trying to insult their character, but it was very, very common to just hear, well, but we've never found this or we found that, and it says this. And then when I would do my own research, or with time, I would hear like, oh no, that's been debunked, or no, like actually here is this thing here. It just brought me to this place. I mean, it happens so many times with inscriptions, with coins, with kings on them who people claim didn't exist, historical documents of wars with other places. I mean, like it just happens so much. I finally just reached this place where I was like, man, I'm not surprised by it anymore. And if I encounter something where people are like, well, there's no archaeology for that, my response is normally now just give it time.
Right.
Because it happens. Here's one. So we mentioned Josephus earlier.
Yeah.
Right. And let's talk about the custom of crucifixion, like the Gospels. The Gospels describe Jesus after he had been crucified as being placed in the tomb of a rich man, right? And some people, they would use Josephus to be like, well, we don't have any evidence for that. In fact, what we think happened was that people were just thrown into mass graves because their bodies weren't a priority and their burial wasn't a priority to the Romans. And so I'll see, look, the Gospels are wrong there. And then in 1968, an archaeologist named Vasilos Tasveris, I think is how you say his name, found the remains of a Jewish crucifixion victim in a proper grave.
Yep.
So like there just all the time, there's so much archaeological corroborating evidence for the authenticity of what we read in the New Testament. I mean, to the point where if we're ignoring it, I think we've got to really work to ignore it. There's just so much there.
I love my favorite part about this whole thing is that this was recorded 2,000 years ago, and we're finding things unearthed.
Yeah.
And you can't. People who know how to study the earth and the layers of how deep something is and how long it's been untouched, like experts are finding things dated back to these times and proving.
Well, look, man, how much of that also, if we're just going to take a step of faith, how much of that is the kindness of God? Because when we talk about this kind of historical criticism and looking at the New Testament with a skeptical eye, a lot of that's a newer idea. I mean, it's not that people have always believed in the New Testament, but in terms of like an age where people will go, no, we've got this or we've got that, and so it can't be true. A lot of that comes out of the Enlightenment of like the 17th and 18th century, which isn't that long ago.
Right.
And so, man, isn't it the kindness of God that, all right, hey, we didn't find this stone until the 1900s. You know what I'm saying? Like that, okay, here's where the world is going culturally. And God if you believe, and I do, that in his wisdom was like, all right, I got some stuff stored up. And I take this with a great deal of comfort, because something for me, I choose to believe as a pastor and as a Christian is, if I have the truth, I don't have to be afraid of falsehood. I believe the truth will be very apparent and will be discovered. And so when we, as we're kind of wrapping up this idea of why do Christians believe in Jesus, I would just say that I think the evidence for the existence, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is very, very strong. And so it's yet another reason to believe.
Well, Bert, after 3 episodes,
A trilogy.
I believe.
Well, that's great.
I believe before too. But.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this deep 3 deeps for 3 episodes, deep dive for why do Christians believe in Jesus. Hopefully it encouraged you, it was helpful to you, answered some questions, and I mean I'm confident we'll find even more stuff.
100%.
More things will pop up. It seems like it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Nonstop. And so it's really cool to know that what we believe is not just in the Bible, but it's also found in the world, in history, because it happened.
Yes.
So that's awesome. Well, if you enjoyed this, please let us know. Send us an email, podcast@wearethebridge.org. We also love getting questions from you, because, I mean, we'll answer our own questions. So a lot of times we'll pick questions that we think people are asking. But if you've got like a serious question, you're like, hey, why? Yeah.
What about this?
Why do Christians do this? Let us know. Email us at podcast@wearethebridge.org. Thanks for listening.